Okay, so this is joint work with Tal Moran, and let's just start with a motivating example. Why doesn't this work? Good. So, today when we use Facebook, basically we treat it as a trusted third party. We give it all our personal data, we give it all our social graph, and we want it to compute all kinds of functions on this data and graph. And it would be really nice if we could achieve all that things that we can achieve today from Facebook, but in a privacy-preserving way. So we still want to be able to compute functions on the graph and our data, but we want privacy for our data and for this social graph. And we want to do it without any trusted third party. So, if that's the goal, you could say, well, don't multi-party computation do that? Don't they allow us to compute a function on multiple inputs of multiple parties in a private way? Well, MPCs, multi-party computations, do not suffice, and let me highlight why. So let's recall what is secure multi-party computation, or MPC in short. The setting is that we have multiple parties, each has a private input, and their goal is to compute some function of all these inputs, where they reveal only the output and nothing beyond the output. Now, we know that MPC exists for every efficient function. It's all great results. And it has tremendous applications, even real-life applications like this sugar beet trading market, etc. But it's not what we want. Why doesn't it suffice? In MPC, they assume that the communication topology is public. Typically, it's not just public, but it's even the complete graph. But there are the settings. It's works known for general topologies, like recent work with Yuval and others. And in our setting, the Facebook example, the communication graph, that's the social graph. We don't want it to be public. That's part of our secret information. So if MPC needs it to be public, but we want to keep it private, so MPC cannot protect this information. So what is our goal? I just want to say that Facebook, is just one example, but this is really a prevalent problem. But now when we have all types of networks in the Internet of Things or vehicle-to-vehicle communication, the network itself reveals a lot of information that we would like to keep private. I don't want everybody to know where I'm driving just by seeing the networks of my near vehicles, etc. So our goal is topology-hiding MPC, and this was suggested in a work by Moran, Orlov, and Richardson in TCC 15. So what does it mean? You want an MPC, multi-party computation, that hides both the private input and also the communication graph. It hides both things. So to elaborate on the settings, we still have multiple parties, and each have a private input, just as in MPC. But when we identify these parties with graph nodes on the communication graph, and there's direct communication between neighbors on the graph, and we assume that each node knows his neighbors, like you do in your social. If you are in Facebook, you know who are your friends, immediate friends in Facebook. And our goal is to compute functions on this input and graph while revealing nothing beyond the output. Where nothing in particular means that we want no information about the graph to be revealed by this. Now, this is a strong requirement, and we don't quite know how to do it currently with current protocols. What we can require today is that we reveal a minimal information on the graph, as little as possible. What do I mean by minimal information? For example, in the work of Moran et al. From TCC 15, they reveal a bound on the diameter and the degree of the graph. So you know some information on the graph, but somehow it seems like quite minimal information. It doesn't reveal too personal data. And in our work, we're going to reveal the number of nodes in the graph. And I have the asterisk there because I'm going to assume some structural properties of the graph that I'll define next.
So in your definition, compute any function of the inputs, do you include functions that depend on the graph?
On your neighbors. Your neighbors, you can think of them as inputs.
No, but if I want, I don't know, to compute something about the graph, can that be part of it?
If you can compute it from each node knowing its neighbors, then yeah.
No, if my input is nothing, I have no input except from my neighbors, and I want to find out
you can
some function of the graph.
Yeah, and then you want to reveal nothing beyond what you reveal, but what you compute.
So it's included in your definition.
And we said we want to compute any function, but by standard MPC works, we know it suffices to compute broadcast in a topology hiding way. And once you do that, from that topology hiding broadcast, you can compute all the other functions. So we're going to focus here just on computing broadcasts on the graph. And
so assume it seems like then the answer is no, because let's say the function is diameter of the graph. Right? If let's say I give you broadcast on the graph, then I don't see, even if you use standard techniques, I don't see you would be able to compute the diameter of the graph from broadcast. Or maybe, well.
No, think of your input. Your input is your neighbors, so you know the graph. Let's take this. Okay, so I want you to get a feel of the problem. So let's see some challenges if I want to compute the broadcast. I have G, here's the broadcaster. You have a bit 0 or 1. And the naive protocol I'd like to do is this flooding protocol, or and forward. He would forward his bit to a neighbor, and they'll forward on and on. So now he gives his bits to A and E, his neighbors. They forward it onward and onward until the entire graph got that bit. And if you get a message from multiple neighbors, then you just OR the message. If you got the 1, it will stay 1. If you got all zeros by now, it will stay 0. But this is completely not topology hiding. For example, you could easily reveal distance from the broadcaster, because if you received your bit on the first clock tick, then you're a distance 1 from the broadcaster. If you received it on the second one, you're a distance 2, or the third one, you're a distance 3. And you could say, let's encrypt the messages, so we don't know what we got. But that doesn't help us, because here we know the distance from the broadcaster just from the fact that we received the message. We don't even have to look at its content. So I bet there are people, I know there are extremely smart people in the audience. I bet you are thinking, well, we could all do some dummy messages so that you don't know what we do. But then these dummy messages still have to be encrypted, so I can't see who's the one sending the 1 bit, where the other was sending zeros. And if they're encrypted, then who has the private key? Anyone who has the private key can decrypt, and then know if it's what is the message. And if we don't have the valid key, then how do you get the broadcasted bit at the end? So these are the type of challenges that were addressed already by the work of Moran et al. And they showed 2 very strong results: impossibility result and feasibility result. The first result they show is that against active adversary, topology hiding broadcast is just impossible. Where active means that the adversary can maliciously deviate from the protocol, say abort.
For a specific topology, I'm assuming not for the complete graph.
Okay, and they show that's impossible already for very simple graphs. They show it for a chain graph, a very simple graph, and for very weak adversarial adversary, a fail-stop adversary. It suffices just that you can abort, and already they can't have topology hiding broadcasts on a chain. On the other hand, they show that it is feasible against passive adversary. So passive adversary follows the protocol, but tries to learn something more. It's also known as honest but curious. And they show that it's feasible for a restricted class of graphs, of network topologies. They need the graph to be of small diameter. So the diameter is the maximal distance between 2 nodes of the graph, and they need this diameter to be logarithmic in the number of nodes of the graph. And if these are the settings, that's what they show. There exists topology hiding broadcast on small diameter graphs against passive adversary. And they show that they use generic MPC and whatever assumptions they can build generic MPC from.
Sorry, just one question. The channels are synchronous point-to-point?
You have channels just for your neighbors. You can talk only with your neighbors.
And they're synchronous because you assume clock.
Yeah.
And do people have global identities? Like, I don't know the number of people, but I know Eliad's name. I mean, I'm trying to see what broadcast means. Like, it's broadcast from, if it's not my neighbor, what does it mean?
Well, it could be anonymous broadcast. Broadcast doesn't need identity. You just want your message to be flooded throughout the network so everybody knows your message.
So can you say again why is broadcast sufficient for every? Because
just because
broadcast allows you to have port, but you need to know now I'm sending to player number 2. They need some identity, no? In the secure multi-party computation, I know who I'm sending to in some. It could be pseudonymous, but you need some identity.
We have a lot to do here, so let's talk about it offline. I don't want to. Okay, so just I'm reminding you that I'm speaking on broadcast, but broadcast implies all functions. That's the question now. And they do need to get some more information for the protocol. They need to be given a bound on the diameter, the degree of the graph, for the protocol to execute their protocol. Okay, so the question that started this research is this small diameter requirement necessary? They have two requirements, the passive adversary, small diameter. Passive is sort of necessary because for active, they have impossibility results. But small diameter, well, maybe it's an artifact of their protocol. The question is, was that necessary? And our main result is to show that there exist topology-hiding protocols for large diameter networks, again, against passive adversary. And our assumption, a standard assumption, for example, DDH, would suffice. So let me elaborate on that result. So again, a broadcast implies all functions, and we need some input. We need to know the number of nodes on the graph. And there's concurrent work on topology-hiding MPC by Hirt et al., but that work also addressed small diameter graphs, only graphs of logarithmic diameter. So I want to address it because we are focusing on the large diameter regime. Their improvement of Morano to try to make to address the same settings, but in a more practical way. Once I'll try to bring a proof of concept of polynomial time algorithm, but a protocol, but not a very efficient one.
You remove the dependence on the degree, and is it unbounded diameter or like what is large?
Unbounded. So let me elaborate on that. So what type of large diameter graphs do we give? So first, the chain. The chain is the highest most diameter possible, and nodes diameter n. Also, where there's cycles, again, utmost diameter. Also, trees or small circumference graphs. Circumference is the length of the longest cycle. So we allow having cycles, not just trees, but the cycles have to be short, up to logarithmic length. And our protocol, we actually give, from first principle, a protocol just for cycles. And then all the other results we get by reduction. We have reduction from cycles to trees, and from trees to small circumference graphs. So if you give someday a different protocol for cycles, you still have a different protocol for the other families that would inherit possibly other properties from it. So what do the reductions look like? We have one reduction showing that if you have topology-hiding broadcasts on cycles, then we can construct topology-hiding broadcasts on trees. And actually, it's a more general result. So we can show we have topology hiding on any graph as long as nodes knows their neighbors in a spanning tree, which sometimes might be realistic assumption in network settings when anyhow you have some spanning tree of the graph to allow networking, to allow communication. And our second reduction shows that if you have topology hiding broadcast for cycles, and you have topology hiding broadcast for small diameter graphs, as we have from the work of more TCC 15, then we can have topology hiding broadcast on small circumference graphs. And again, this is actually more general. The result holds for arbitrary graphs, as long as we have an information local algorithm for computing spanning tree neighbors. Well, what do I mean by information local algorithm?
What do you mean by that? Spanning tree neighbors? I don't understand. Spanning tree, so graph induced by the neighbors? Or?
Okay, so if you have a graph and no locality, you can compute the spanning tree of the graph. So now we want to compute the spanning tree of, compute the spanning tree of the graph where each node just knows who its neighbors are and nothing more. And we want to do it by an info local algorithm. That means that the output of each node depends only on its k neighborhood. The node, the distance at most k from it, where k is the same as we'd have for small circumference. If small circumference would be logarithmic for us, so k again would be logarithmic.
What's the message size?
What's the what?
The message size.
What message? We have graph size. And
when you do the broadcast.
We just assume a bit here. But it could be something else.
This doesn't grow the more.
No, it does not grow. So let me.
So why logarithmic?
Let me show you the protocol, and you'll see. So just two remarks. even when you look at simple networks like cycles, topology hiding is still not trivial because you still have to hide stuff like the order of the nodes on the cycle. It's still private. And also, you know, if you think of voting, voting is just like parallel broadcast. We have each node has its bit or its message, and it sends the outputs reveals the broadcast those messages for all the nodes. So what we're actually going to do is not broadcast, but by voting. The end outcome would be a list of all the votes of all the nodes. And we're inspired by some works by mixed networks and voting prior works there. So just before the protocol, I want to highlight the main tool that we use. And basically, everything I say here is just El-Gamal. I just want to highlight the properties of El-Gamal that we're going to need. So one property, we need public key encryption. We need to be re-randomizable. So if you have a ciphertext, the public key can generate a fresh ciphertext for the same message. And I want it to be key commutative. Privately, I mean that I need it to be key commutative only if I have the secret key. I don't need it to be with the public key. So I have this notation that M bracket K is the encryption of M under public key K. And if I have the secret key, I want to be able to efficiently compute the public key corresponding to it. And I want to be able to add encryption layer and delete encryption layer. And encryption layer means I have encryption under some key. And I want to add to it another layer under another public key. And deleting the layer, just removing one encryption layer. So we can add and delete layers as we please. And all that is just using El-Gamal or under DDH assumption. So let's see our topology hiding voting on this cycle. The protocol, it's just, I'm going to fit it all in this one slide. It has two phases. In the first phase, we begin where every node has its own vote, and we end when every node has a list of all votes, but all votes are encrypted. So it has a list of encrypted votes. How does it do it? It just continues, it goes in n ticks, where at each tick it receives a list of encrypted nodes from its neighbor. It adds to this list its own encrypted vote and sends the incremented list to its neighbor. So you see, node PI, player I, got a list from its successor. It added to this list its own vote under the previous key with adding a layer of its own key. And it also added another encryption layer for all the other keys. So now we have the list increased from to include one more vote, and it's hidden, it's wrapped by another layer, the layer of the player PI. When we end this phase, we have a list of all votes wrapped by one layer for each of these players. And now what we're going to do is just we're going to shuffle this list and delete the layers. So we're again going to continue in n rounds. Each time you receive a vector of encrypted votes. Now, first you're going to shuffle them, so they can be traced to the order when they begin. And then you're going to remove one layer, the layer that you added in the previous phase. After doing that for n ticks, you get a plain text vector of a list of all votes in some shuffled order, so that if there's even just one honest player along the cycle, you can tell what is how to trace each vote to the original voter. So that's a cycle, and I'm not going to say anything about the proof due to time constraint, but we prove it in simulation-based definitions, etc. Okay, so what about the trees and the low circumferences graph? Let's just, I said it all through reductions. Let's think first of a theory problem that would give the idea of that. Think that we have an arbitrary graph, but somehow we know a cycle that traverses all the nodes of the graph. By some magic, we have this cycle. Now, and we assume that each node knows its successor and predecessor on that cycle. So now if we just apply our topology hiding voting on that cycle traversal, we get a voting on the entire graph, on all nodes of the graph. They all participate in the cycle. So if we do topology hiding voting on this cycle traversal, we get topology hiding voting on the graph. And this is the high-level idea for reduction. We're going to find a cycle-traversal and then run topology-hiding voting on that cycle-traversal. Now, of course, find that we need to reveal only local information, and we have to do it in topology-hiding way. And this is somewhat simplified view that would actually work for our result for trees, but when I go to the result for small circumference graph, we can't really separate these two steps, because already the cycle-traversal would reveal information that's not topology hiding. So we're going to somehow do both steps under the hood. I'll show you in a second how we do it. So let's, okay, so if this was our idea to find cycle-traversal and then topology hiding vote on that, that raises a few questions. First, does it even exist? Now, if you remember your algorithm, probably say that's like a Hamiltonian cycle. Why should that exist? So it's not. It exists for every graph. It's not Hamiltonian cycle because we allow the cycle to visit a node multiple times, not just once. Can it be found efficiently? Yes, in every graph. If I have time, you'll see how. Can it be found topology hiding? Yes, in trees. And in small circumference graph, roughly. I'll show you what I mean by that. Yeah.
But by revealing that if I am a node and if it's going to go through me twice, then it reveals some more information.
It won't. Let's see how we do it. So how do we find, if we have a tree, how do we find a cycle that traverses it? So the algorithm is really simple. Here's the tree. Each node is just going to pick a random ordering of its neighbors, say this is the first, second, third, fourth, and say that when I get a message from the first, I move it to the second, from the second to the third, third to fourth, fourth to first, etc. And we do that for all the nodes. So if you have just one neighbor, you of course relay back to it. If you have two, then you have two directions, etc. And now what we prove is that if we take these simple rules and we just combine them together, we get a cycle that traverses the entire graph. This is a cycle, and if I spread it out a bit, you can see it's a cycle. And we have multiple occurrences for nodes according to their degree, because A has to behave differently if you receive the message from G or from B, so we have two occurrences for that on the cycle. Just one more minute. So we do need to know the cycle length, I remind you, but this is not, for trees, it's not that hard, because we know that the cycle length is a sum of degrees, which node appears by its degree. The sum of the degree by graph theory 101, it's twice the number of edges. And in trees, we know exactly what the number of edges is. So we know the length of a cycle. What about k-circumference graphs? So first we said we devise info-local algorithm. It's the one before open questions slide, so it was the slide. So how do you find spanning tree info locally? If the cycles are short, then if you look at your k neighborhood, you'll see the entire cycle. And then you just remove an edge, and there's some subtleties here because we need to guarantee consistency. But when you do that, that's not topology hiding, because even just the output is not topology hiding. The cycle, if you know that the edge is on the cycle or not, it reveals something about that neighbor that you wouldn't know otherwise. So we're going to bootstrap. What I mean by bootstrap, you're going to do all that under the hood. Under the hood, we're going to find cycle-traversal and do the topology hiding voting, where to do that, we're going to use topology hiding MPC. And you could say, how can you use topology hiding MPC? That's what we were trying to do. But note, we're going to do it only on the k neighborhood. And the k neighborhood is sort of like a k diameter graph, where we have topology hiding MPC from prior work. And this is actually more general. It is as a compiler for every info-local algorithm to topology hiding one.
How do you know that you stay in the k neighborhood?
How do I know what?
That you stay within the k neighborhood. When you run this step, how do you know that you're staying within the k neighborhood?
I know the parameter k from the quick. When I assume I work for a k-circumference graph, then this is the parameter of the protocol, k.
When you run the protocol, how I'm missing something, go on.
Here, you're saying here, how do I know the things? So I'm hiding a lot. This part is actually not that easy. And there is a lot of technicalities to how to actually write that. So it's fine to not see all the details. So okay, so we give topology hiding voting for some large diameter graphs. And open questions are, can we still say something about malicious adversary? Maybe there's some other restrictions, or treat other families of large diameter graph.